All right. So where were we? We were in Del Rio,
Glen Rio.
Glen Rio, and we already talked about born and raised. The next question was, what was your neighborhood like growing up? What was your neighborhood like growing up?
Which one?
I don't know.
Well, of course, when we lived in Glen Rio, I think I went to kindergarten there, and so one year, and it's just a very rural area. I mean, a white spot in the road. So in a little town, there was probably no more than 50 people. So, and I was young, you know. All of my time was spent mostly in the depot, and of course, as you have this on tape already, that I was in. I came to Modesto in 1937. I was born in 1934. So I spent 3 years there, but I mean, I don't remember any of that. But in our travels back and forth between Glen Rio and California were numerous. That it was in the area. The times that I could really remember is that I went the 7th and 8th grade in a place called Adrian, and it was 22 miles to the town, but I was the first one on the bus and the last one off the bus. And when we would pick up students to take them to school, these large ranches could be 50,000 acres, and we might have to drive 10 miles back to the house and back. So I traveled 110 miles a day, 55 up, 55 back. So pretty, but it was at the 7th, 8th grade. It was quite a change from leaving Modesto. And I don't know. We'll come back to Modesto, where most of my life was spent. That coming out to a rural area like that, and
What was the neighborhood like in Modesto? Like where you grew up with Jim Parks?
Okay, we lived right across the street from a park, which had basketball goal, 2 tennis courts, and a lot of activity because the kids would all come over to the park. And so I had a lot of good friends there. Went to Washington Elementary for a number of years, and then the last years I went to a school called Franklin. Had lots of friends, lots of activity in the park.
And your good friends were Jim Parks, and who else?
Clarence Gibson.
And he died at an early age, like 16.
No, he's about 19. He died in, he was a professional baseball player. And in the wintertime, he was driving a milk truck and went to sleep, hit a bridge, burned. Terrible, terrible. But those are my 2 of the closest friends, but I had lots of friends. And being at a park like that where a lot of people were there, coming over to play and whatever, so yeah.
Then you went to Modesto High School.
I went to Modesto High, yeah.
Grandpa went to Modesto High.
1930 graduated,
What year did you graduate? 55?
1952.
What was your first car?
In 1932, Chevrolet, that one of the kids that owned it had just cut the top of it off, so it was just a 2-seater. And I bought it for little or nothing. Bought an engine for $2. And my dad was a mechanic, so I looked at it, and the bearings were not very good. But anyway, he got it to running, and being in the country there, I could drive it out in the country. See, because I was only maybe 14 years old or so. Next car was a 1936 Ford, and then my car, which was my Sunday go to meeting car, was a 1937 Ford.
It was a, what'd you call it? A Sunday go to meet?
It was a nicer car.
What was the term?
Sunday go to meeting car.
Meeting girls?
Yeah, yeah. And the sad thing about it is, I was a pretty good kid, and my dad had not a brand new, but he had a nice Chevrolet, and he would not let me use it. I have no idea why.
Describe your mother.
Saint. She was had a very difficult life. Grew up in a very poor family. I think it was about 8 kids. Like in World War II, I think it was 6 boys in World War II.
Where was she in the?
ND.
No, where was she in the numbers of kids? Was she older, younger, in the middle?
In the middle. In the middle. And to show you how poor they were, they would, this during the Depression, they have breakfast maybe and have pancakes, and if there was syrup still left, they'd put their plate back up in the cupboard and use the syrup. That's a story that she told me. I mean, it was, and see, my mom was a quarter Cherokee. I think a quarter. I think her dad must have been half or more Cherokee Indian. And he looked, I didn't really know him, and didn't know her mother very well either. In later years, they lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But the little town where the school was at was called Indee, E-N-D-E-E. That's where Uncle Paul, my uncle, went. And you've seen this on television, where a small school in basketball would go all the way to the state championship. And see, they didn't have it divided up. And, even California did for a while.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a little small school could go the distance. They would have what they call regionals, or county regionals. And if you won there, you just kept going. And he was an all-state center.
How tall was he?
New Mexico.
He was tall.
6'2", 6'3".
There was a lot of height in the family.
Well, Dad 6'6".
Mm-hmm.
Grandfather was 6'1", and I was 6.
Did Grandma have a high school diploma?
No,
How far did her education go?
probably probably a little past junior high. I'm gonna guess. Got married, I think 16. My dad, I forgot how old he was. He was out of high school. So.
How old was she when she had you?
Oh, I have no idea. No idea.
Under 20?
Probably. Yeah, probably. Is it off? And like I say, I was born with a midwife, or had a midwife there, because it was 41 miles one way to a hospital and 72 the other way. And,
Where did your mother and father meet?
high school, probably. Small community.
In Texas?
Well, right in the border there.
Right.
New Mexico was where the school was at, and the school I went to was in Texas.
Is that
So-
in the Glen Rio?
Right by the depot.
Okay.
You can see the sign on that little painting out there.
Mm-hmm.
I was almost half and half.
And so your father was a mechanic.
Mechanic,
Where did he learn that trade?
partly at Modesto High,
Uh-huh.
pretty good student. And that's one of the reasons that they sent him out here to live with my great-grandparents. But So he worked while he was going to school, I think, in a big, not a big, but an electrical shop. You know, motors in those days could be, if they were out on a big ranch or something, that could be as large as 6 foot tall, these giant motors. And then I don't know whether he took any mechanical. He must have at Modesto High too, because they had a lot of Mandolins, I think they called it, and was a very good mechanic. And see, those were the days when you didn't have what they call sun machines, which are diagnostic machines. It was you get out of the when you're tuning up the car, it was just 2 or 3 places on the carburetor, and then you go around to the back, you stick your hand under, see how much moisture, and tune-up was a big deal because of most of the hackers. And then he ended up building a service station himself
In
in a
Modesto?
garage in New Mexico there.
Okay.
Yeah, and was, of course, was having the difficulty with the alcohol even then.
Mhm.
But
And how old would that have been?
How old?
How old would he have been
boy,
at
I
that
don't
time?
know.
20s, 30s?
23rd, yeah. And so the community, you know, loved him, and because most of those guys were just nut busters, and could have made a very good living. And it was on right on Highway 66.
Route 66?
Yeah. The gas prices in New Mexico were high because of the taxes on them. In Texas, it was cheaper. And then the other thing about that border was that the county in Texas was dry as far as booze goes, where in New Mexico it wasn't. So this, like the farmers, when the wheat farmers would in the summertime, they'd come over to pickups and just load up with beer, 3 feathers, and 4 roses, rot gut whiskey.
Oh.
People wondered, they would drive through. I worked at a service station a number of years besides on the ranch and farms, because I went there every summer. When I was in high school, I'd leave probably 2 days after school was out and come back right when the school began. And so in working at the service station on Highway 66, everybody was coming from like somewhere between there and Chicago, going to LA. I mean,
With big dreams.
90%.
Mhm.
And then on the other side of the coin, I was old enough to, I don't know how old that would have been, where people were still migrating from,
The Dust Bowl?
yeah, from the Dust Bowl. And, you know, I remember a Plymouth 2-seater where they had pulled the little back, they call them sedans, I think. And here were, you know, 3 people in the front and maybe 5 people laying down in the back there. And then when I bought the little raccoon, there was a truck come in, you know, just loaded up with people, everything they owned, and kids would be back in the truck there. So I'm putting gas in the truck, and all of a sudden I feel on my shoulder this little animal, and there was a little raccoon about that big. So I asked them if they'd like to sell it. Well, they needed the money, so I forgot what I paid for it, $5 or something like that.
So you probably knew that they needed to sell it, or could sell it.
Oh, sure.
Because you saw a lot
Oh,
of
I
people.
bought all kinds of stuff
Yeah.
over the years. Bought a car. That's where another car I bought. I forgot. But some very terrible sights. Seeing those people come through there,
Because they're in such a desperate.
going to pick fruit. Yeah, and some of these people.
Was there though a sense of hope though when you saw? Did you detect when some of these people were on their way?
I have no idea. Oh, must have been because, well, it was their only option. Yeah. And you've probably seen the movies or read the book that was written by the guy in Monterey, I can't think of his name,
Steinbeck.
Steinbeck, yeah. And a lot of that's very true, right here in Modesto. See, that was the beginning of the tent caps and all those kind of things.
So back to family. Who are some other significant family members in your life?
Well, the biggies are my great-grandmother and grandfather lived in Modesto. And before that, they lived in Berkeley. And she ran a boarding house at the University of California. And my great-grandfather was a salesman for Wellman Peck, that's foods. Before that, he owned in Albuquerque, New Mexico, he owned a store, and that was when the stores had still a lot of bulk. You'd go a pound of beans, you'd go do this and do that. And before that, he was a sales manager with Piggly Wiggly. You ever heard that name? I think they very active in the Shrine organization. In those days, that was a big deal. And he was a 32nd degree. And when you get to that point, then you have to, if you got money, then you just travel and do things with the Shriner organization. And so he's very active in that. And my great-grandmother was an Eastern Star lady. So I think they gave him the franchise of New Mexico. And so New Mexico population is very small. Albuquerque was the only town of any size. And they were there for, I don't know how long. Went broke.
Who went? They went
Great-grandfather,
broke.
yeah. In fact, when we lived in the little cottage when we moved back to Modesto at their house, they had an old trunk and I was out there, all this stock, oil stock, and I checked on it to see if it was worth anybody, but he lost his butt, and that's when they moved to Berkeley.
What year did they lose their butt?
See, there was another.
Was it the Depression?
There was another. I can't remember the years.
Another dip.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That was after the Depression?
Before.
Before the Depression.
Yeah. So that would have been 30s, whatever it was. But
and then some of your friends, significant friends, as an adult.
oh gosh. Well, I was trying to think back though, the other,
Family.
family and people. We used to come and visit quite often. Some people lived in Canadian Texas. He had a ranch, and so we would always go there and visit. So, and before that, he was the foreman of a very large ranch right there close to Glen Rio. So those were my aunt.
And who was that?
Rutledge, and it was can't think of her name, Sylvie, and they had 2 boys and 2 girls, and I was very close to them. In fact, I still had contact with I call him Button. It was Raymond D. They all moved to Nebraska later on. The family did, and so we kept in contact. In fact, he only died about 3 years ago, and he was this can't seem being he was wrote Western poetry, and here's an old cowboy. All of his life, rode horses. They had some wheat and all that kind of stuff. But and said him a poet, and so we kept in contact quite a bit, and two of the boy, one boy is still living. His oldest sister died of dementia, and I think the other one, I haven't talked to her in about a year. but those were of that side of the family were the significant. And in fact, I worked up there one year on a combine, and that was different. Boy, the kids that lived on those ranches, usually the father might have been a foreman at one time at a ranch. They ran a tight ship. You didn't do your chores, you were in a heap of trouble.
What happens if you're in a heap of trouble?
Well, there's probably some corporate punishment, but there's other ways.
Yeah. Extra work.
Yeah.
Then of course there's Paula.
Say again?
There's Paula.
Well, Paula, of course, is pretty much my sister, and that was Uncle Paul's daughter, and there were 2 boys. No, it's wrong. 1 boy and 2 girls in the family, 3 of them. And I was very close to Paula. They lived in San Jose when they moved to this area, and he drove a truck for years here. And was divorced, and Paula lived in Oregon for a number of years. They had a pretty tough life, but we've been very, very close and still talk about every couple of weeks or so. But she was really a sister.
So you want to adult friends. I mean, you had Jim Parks, who was your childhood friend, who was your close friend as an adult as well.
Well, Clarence Gibson, the one that was killed in the accident, he was, we were like brothers, together all the time, played sports together, chased girls together, and he was also, had a very nice mother and could go over there a lot, and so we just, it was a very difficult time when I lost him. Yeah, he was. Then Jim Parks. Those are my 2 closest friends. Like with Jim Parks, I spent, in the high school years, I spent probably 20% or 30% of my time over there. My mom, realized it was very difficult. And so I would go over there and play games at night. He had a sister, and
because there's no TV. Did you guys listen to radio much, or?
I don't remember listening to radio very much. Yeah. When you go out there, see that we'd play canasta, was the game, and so I was very close to Jim all those years. And he was, when I got married, he was in the service, so he couldn't be at the wedding. He was in Germany, and then of course, later on, Phil, Eloise's brother, was truly a brother also. We're very, very close.
And you being an only child, that was important. You being an only child.
Yeah, that was not a big deal. I don't think it was a real big deal for Kim. Being an only child, like when I was back in Texas, like for instance, there wasn't a lot of kids around close to play with. So I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and he was a puzzle guy that the big companies like food and like Ivory Snow, they would send these things out to people, and they would go from the first stage, second stage, and really it'd be word puzzles. And he would, he had plenty of time at the depot there, and a little hunt and peck on his typewriter. And so he would get, I forgot how far he ever got and whether he made any money, but he had all kinds of books. World Book, for instance. He bought the first edition that came out, and they would send out maybe an edition every month. So with plenty of time, I didn't read every one of them, but I looked at every page probably of that whole. He had a set of Harvard classics. I had all kinds of books on 10-letter words, 20-letter words. I mean, he was really detailed. And really lots of interesting stories. Grew up in Mississippi.
You're talking about great grandpa.
My grandfather.
Yeah.
Grew up in Mississippi.
What was his full name?
John Wesley. And that was a jungle almost. In fact, that's where they trained the infiltrators for the Korean War, I think it was, or maybe Vietnam, and also Korea. And they had to, live with no gun, nothing, and just to change a little bit moving forward. I hired a guy at the group that was going to school, and he was an infiltrator. And the stories he told me, he was trained in Australia, and when they, I'll call them decommissioned him, there was another word to bring him back to reality, because they might have been out 6 months. They actually, this sounds terrible, but when they would bring them back in, they'd have them in like leg chains, because if somebody might have tapped him on the shoulder, boom, 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 like that. He really had some interesting, and spoke a couple, 3 languages. Really interesting guy. But where was I going with this?
I don't know. We started with adult friends. So you talked about Jim, and then you had all your friends from Gould Medical
Okay, yeah.
Group.
And of course, so I played ball, and so I had lots.
You played basketball.
Yeah.
Only basketball. Did you play baseball?
Baseball.
You played baseball also.
Yeah.
No football.
And some tennis. No football. I did a terrible thing. See, I got hurt when I was 14 years old, either from from a horse, again 40 miles to a doctor's. They just load you in a pickup and take you to a chiropractor in those days. And then
There were chiropractors back then?
yeah,
Huh.
and I diverse that later on, when I was seeing actually a specialist in San Francisco, because he didn't have an orthopedist here, but Dr. Beta was saying, what they do, chiropractors, they rip you around. So when the horse threw me, my hip was up and stuff at the back, and so when their equipment, X-ray equipment, was terrible. So when we went to Gould, then they were taking. CR says, you know what? You're very lucky that you're walking, because in my back, the lower lumbar area, about L1, the whole chunk in the back there, so the spinal cord was exposed. So if that would have snapped, it would have been all over. So I've never seen a psychiatrist or a chiropractor since then. But back to football, I decided I wanted to play. I saw those clowns out there, couldn't catch the ball, and so I went to spring practice, and finally realized that I forged my mom's name, and so one of the things is head on head, and if you're smart, you hit somebody. So I got this weightlifter in front of me and hit him a few times and thought, maybe. Plus, it was going to be difficult after not playing all those years, because I was, hopefully it was going to be running back.
You get up to speed.
Yeah.
So as far as, who else in regards to Gould Medical Group?